Hey YouTube! This is my day 11 drawing for Inktober. I went into this sketch with the concept of girl kissing a wolf skull. I wanted to show the bond between man and dogs originally, but a wolf skull seemed just a little bit more metal and cool to me. I'd never drawn a wolf skull before, so I found it really hard. I'm so glad the eraser is a thing. Before I started filming this video, I'd actually made a few very failed attempts and ended up getting frustrated and taking a break. One of the issues I had to stay aware of was keeping spatial awareness of the space I had to draw in. And as you can see, even in the end, I kind of fudged that up a bit. The wolf still is way too close to the left. I probably should have drawn this in the other direction. Oh well. I knew I wanted flowers and plants surrounding them as a frame. I wanted to show the contrast between pretty living flowers and the dead skull. I wish I'd put a little more thought into which flowers I chose to use. I know flowers have different meanings like friendship, love, betrayal, and all that. I feel like I would have had an overall more meaningful piece if I'd done that kind of research beforehand. Visually, I'm happy with how the flowers looked in the end, and I did end up picking flowers just because I thought they were pretty, or I thought the way they would fit in the frame would be appropriate. But next time, I think more research is necessary. When I first started drawing the female character, I wanted to give her a fancy hairstyle. But comparing her with the rest of the drawing, I decided it would be too much. Between the detailed flowers and the wolf skull, I felt like her hairstyle would just get lost if I gave her blonde, fancy, curly hair with an updo like I'd originally intended. Another thing I began to consider was that the wolf skull took up way more space than her, and, at least to me, was more visually interesting to her. I needed a way to make sure that she didn't completely disappear in the drawing. My solution was to give her a short bob haircut that I would color in black later. That way, even though she takes up less space and isn't, to me, as interesting as the skull, she would still draw attention because her hair would be the only place with solid black inking. I'd intended to do cross-hatching and the like everywhere else, minus the inside of the wolf's mouth. As I started putting down my first round of inked lines, I used the same sized pen. I wanted to see how the drawing would look with the final lines in place before I started deciding where thickness should go and where I should crosshatch and so on. While I like the composition, drawing backgrounds is still a skill that I'm developing, so this seemed very busy to me. I like the balance of the drawing so far, but I knew if I was going to be happy with the final product, I would need to take advantage of line thickness and different types of texturing and crosshatching with my pen to differentiate everything enough to keep it interesting to me. I was most intimidated by using ink to shade in the wolf skull using cross-hatching and dots. I think it's because to me the skull would have more of a variety of shading than I'm used to because it's white and has so many curves and hollow places. When it comes to cross-hatching and using ink to shade, I felt like the best option for this drawing was to start with shading the wolf skull, partly because he intimidated me the most. Between being white and having curves and hollow places, and me wanting to avoid using just plain black to fill in places like the eyes and the nose, I thought creating texture and shadow would be most challenging. I was concerned that the way I would ink it would make it not look black anymore or look really out of place. So I wanted to be sure I did the skull right before I did everything else. I was more confident I'd be able to work with the flowers and the woman rather than the skull. I also partly shaded the skull first to give me an idea of how detailed my flowers should be in comparison, and how thick I should make the lines. I wanted to make sure there's some sort of contrast. I had ideas of what I could do with the flowers, no concept of how simple or detailed their shading should be until I shaded the skull. It was important to me for the composition of this photo that she was kissing the wolf. I wanted to express a bond that transcended death, I guess. Okay, I snuck in one flower that doesn't really exist. Let me just have it. I kind of free-handed that flower. I probably shouldn't have done that, but whatever. The top right corner up there looked too empty to me at this stage, so I just threw in a spider web. I thought it would be cute. I gave my initial ink lines time to dry and then erased them so I could begin shading. Because the drawing had so many elements, I didn't want to be distracted by the color lines. I don't think I could have shaded it the way I did if I had left the color in. I really tried to take my time while I was shading inside the eye. I wanted to try and do a slow build-up to show how the eye was hollowed out and the bone sits in different ways. I'm not an expert at animal skulls, but I felt I would be lazy if I just filled it in solid black like I did with the inside of its mouth. Slow build-up was my friend in shading the skull, as well as not trying to do each piece by itself at once. I tried to work on the whole thing in stages. That way none of the pieces ended up not matching each other. Looking at the video, I can kind of see that I tried to use cross-hatching to create shadow, but then I would use the pointillism-ish dots to show texture and bumpiness. To me, a super smooth skull looks kind of unnatural for whatever reason, which is odd because I'm not an expert on human anatomy. For all I know, skulls are really smooth, but without the texture lines, I don't think this skull would have turned out as well as I think it did. I briefly toyed with leaving the wolf's teeth completely white, but between all of the background white, I decided that was enough white for this drawing. I tried to ink the girl in kind of the same manner, using cross-hatching and texture-ish dots. I wanted her to match this skull and be from the same world as it. As I filled in her hair with black ink, I left white lines. I could have come in with a jelly roll pen after coloring the whole area black, but I really wanted to try and have the white lines in her hair match the paper behind her exactly, and use this as a chance to practice my control over my marker pen. Something I hadn't considered about Inktober was how much ink I would be going through. Normally I stick to my Micron pens or my Pocket Pilot brush pen, but as I started running out of ink, it forced me to actually bust out my Prismacolor Premier inking pens. I don't know why I stopped using them. I think I just got distracted by the shiny newness of my Micron pens when I got them. Sorry, a part is coming up where the camera cut off while I was shading bangs. My bad. After the black in her hair was filled in, I was comfortable dealing with the flowers. My two main characters were pretty much complete, so now I could judge how I was going to outline these things. With how dramatic her black hair looked, I decided that the drawing needed more black, so I went with dark Art Nouveau-ish lines around the flowers. I also added dark lines around their centers as well to draw a little more attention to them. I tried to keep in mind that this is intended to be a full piece on inking alone and not with the intention to add color. So I tried to use bold, thick lines to draw attention to the flowers and give them a little bit more oomph and drama. Once I had added the dramatic dark lines around the flowers, though, I felt the stems in the background were fading a bit too much, along with the vines. So I started messing with the ink lines on the vines, too. I feel like it was a really good call for me to start out with thin lines and slowly build up. I think I'll eventually reach the point where I can ink in real time, I guess, and pick out the appropriate sized pen as I put down the lines, but I still have some work to go. I know it's better to do that way because then I'll have stronger, more confident lines and have less of a risk of going over a straight line in a bad way and having to fix it by making it thicker than it needs to be. But hey, I'll get there. Another thing this drawing was good for was making me more conscious of monitoring everything as I go. Like, I'd made her bob black, which made me need to put more attention to the flowers because they're in the foreground, so I added the thick black lines, which then made the frames of the vines look boring, so I thickened those lines. But then the stems just looked bad to me after that, so then I had to shade it. But overall, I was really happy with the result. Cross-hatching is my friend. This drawing was a nice lesson in patience and giving each part of your drawing all your attention as you work on it. I'm so guilty of drawing one thing then slacking on the rest. When I focused my patience on dealing with each element one at a time, you can really see the work I put into it. I added a little bit of shading to the flowers, but left them white for the most part. Being in the foreground and having the big black thick lines, I didn't think they needed any more oomph than they already had. Something I find kind of funny is what pushed me to work so hard on the line art was the thought that I really like this idea, I really like this composition, so I had to put all my effort into making it look good because I wouldn't be able to color it. Because the point of Inktober is to use pen and ink, not color. But I like my end result so much it makes me want to color it with the cross-hatching in. I'm really going to have to consider how this affects my style of drawing going forward. Because a lot of what I use the texture and cross-hatching for, I would generally use color for, like implying shadow and so on. Luckily, I have the rest of Inktober to play with these things. And this is the complete drawing. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.